So we spent half a segment last episode talking about how Alabama and Georgia would dominate the rest of the season in college football. Of course, the very next week, not even just a few days later, actually, Alabama falls to Texas A&M, having their first loss of the season.
Uh, there's a lot to be said here. There's a lot of things that we say on the show pretty confidently, and I think we're pretty much in the right to say that. Like, I do not think that anybody at the time that we made that recording would have been like, "Oh, those guys are dumb." However, it is very ironic that literally a few days later they lose a shootout to A&M. They stayed in the game. They fought hard to try to come back and take it, but they do not take it. And so we will look at what exactly happened stat wise real quick. So let's start with Texas A&M. Quarterback Zach Calzada comes out and goes 21 for 31 for 285 yards. There's 3 touchdowns to only 1 interception. Isaiah Spiller rushes 17 times for only 46 yards. That's not very efficient, but he does grab a touchdown. Anaya Smith pulls in 2 touchdowns on 85 yards. And Jaden Weidermeyer gets 73 yards and a touchdown on just 3 catches. That's super impressive for him. Uh, Devin Achane, I think this team is going to beat me up as far as names go. Gets a 96-yard kick return touchdown. I mean, that's only in college, man. And then Leon O'Neal Jr. recovers a Brian Robinson Jr. fumble. We talked about Brian Robinson last week as being dominant in that game, and we'll get to him in a minute as well. And then Devontae Richardson picks off Bryce Young, and Seth Small does not miss a kick, and that includes him nailing the game-winning field goal, which was just a huge moment for them. Now for Bama, they don't play terrible. It takes them a little bit to get going, but they just can't overcome um, the A&M here. Bryce Young goes 28 for 48. That is not good. And he does get 369 yards. He does throw 3 touchdowns to only 1 pick, but that is just not good efficiency at all. He missed 20 passes. Brian Robinson Jr., however, he does rush for 147 yards, so he's still racking up a lot of gain here, but he does not get a touchdown and he does get a fumble, so definitely not as good as he was last week. Jameson Williams brings in 146 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, and Roydell Williams gets the other touchdown. King Mukuta, it's a punt return touchdown for Alabama, so more special teams fun here. And then DeMarco Helms picks off Calzada. So it's a fun game. It's a super entertaining game, and for a lot of people, this is probably an interesting result. I know a lot of people like to just sit and prey on the downfall of who's ever at the top of the college ranking. So I mean, for those people, here you go, and for those people who just really don't like Alabama, this was your game. A&M came out to play, and I think Alabama just wasn't ready for that kind of play. And by the time they got ready, it just wasn't there wasn't enough time left, and that field goal came, and that kicker was on fire, and he did not play like the NFL kickers played on Sunday, so he did great.
But just a few things that I want to mention real quick. So overall, passing the ball, Alabama had almost 100 more yards passing, about 60 more yards rushing, same yards per play, total yards about 150 more yards. Same on first downs. They were way more efficient. Well, not way more, but decently more efficient on third down. They ran a whole lot more plays, and they had the ball 7 minutes longer. Just looking at that, you're like, okay, this is another Alabama domination. But it just didn't happen. And them came out and it wasn't they dominated Alabama as far as the score, but it seemed more like it was just like A&M was just better. They played better from the beginning to halftime. Halftime, you come out and Alabama starts to kick up, and they're like, all right, it's going to be another Alabama game where they're down and everybody thinks they're going to be out, but then they come back and end up winning. And it was looking like that until later in the game. And them get some stops, and then they're able to kick that game winning field goal. Now, one Alabama touchdown they probably shouldn't have had because guys weren't even set, and where A&M didn't even have someone covering one of their receivers. So that probably shouldn't have happened. They probably would have scored anyway. But regardless, two plays, excuse me, that really captured this game for me. Alabama blocking a punt and scoring a touchdown. And then as they're kicking off, they allow that 96-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. I'm like, at that point, Even though Alabama was coming back, making it a game at this point, it was just like, all right, maybe A&M just has their number today. And considering A&M was ranked high earlier in the season, they started off beating Kent State, beating Colorado barely, then whooping New Mexico. We're like, okay, maybe they're good, but they're not that good. And maybe. And then they lose to Arkansas, only put up 10 points in that game. Then they lose to Mississippi State. And I'm like, all right, they're out of the polls now. We don't think A&M is really that good. And then they come out and beat Alabama. They're back in the polls. I really can't explain this A&M team. I think it was just pure heart. If this game was not in Texas, they probably would have lost. If they were in Alabama, I think they would have lost the game. But they were in their home and they were able to pull it off. As for Alabama going forward, their schedule isn't really hard. I early in the season, I would have said, just based off of the week 1, week 2 rankings, A&M, Arkansas, and then the Auburn game would have been the hard ones. And I think after this, Alabama's probably going to go on a tear. I'm not predicting that they're going to go undefeated because they might burn me again. But regardless, I think they will definitely take out their anger on the aforementioned Mississippi State and Tennessee, who's playing pretty well this season. And LSU, they got them after that. New Mexico State. Then you have your probably their biggest game besides the A&M game is against Arkansas. Uh, Depending on how they do for the rest of the season, and then of course the Iron Bowl against Auburn. So we're not gonna get too much into how things will turn out as far as the playoff. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the episode. But I don't think this is going to be the end for Alabama. But it does definitely look bad losing to a team got that was ranked high, and then they get beat up a few times, get knocked out of the polls, and then lose to that same team. So not panic button, but it definitely looks bad for Bama.
Yeah, this is a stain that I think Bama will probably wash off just fine. I don't want to make a fool of myself and end up, like you said, I don't want to say they'll go undefeated, but it's probably likely. And yeah, I don't think this is panic time. They clearly could have won this game just if they just kind of fired up too late. So this wasn't like they got obliterated. And like you said, I mean, yard wise and everything like that, they were doing better. It just didn't work out for them. So not a time to panic. And I think the home court, home field advantage is definitely something that's maybe a little overlooked. Uh, Texas A&M being able to play in Texas and having that momentum at the end of that game probably does help a lot. I do agree that maybe if this was in Alabama, that this wouldn't have ended the way it ended. If the rest of the game would have started the way it did. So definitely not panic time for Alabama. Just got to kind of brush this one off. And for this A&M team, I mean, they're probably not. I mean, well, they're not making the playoffs, but they are very intriguing and they've got a lot of heart. So it'll be interesting to see how they perform for the rest of their season.